All right, my shoulder's still cooked, so not many lifting options today, and I thought what better opportunity than just to take people through absolutely everything that they need to know to either get themselves or their clients into plyometric training. So we're gonna cover the three main variations that I use for the bulk of my plyometric programming, which is your leaping, bounding, and hopping. Shout out to Matt Watson for that system. I'm gonna talk about what you should look out for in terms of the form, in terms of programming intensity, progressions and regressions, because it's not as straightforward, or it's a little bit different to progressing with your strength training. All right, so if you've been following me for any period of time by now, you'll know that leaping is my absolute go-to when it comes to introducing someone to plyometrics. And this just isn't for Susan from accounting, it's even for like someone who's quite athletic, who's just never had any exposure to structured or deliberate plyometric training. So the reason why leaping is just such a good entry point is because it's just a nice stable base of support. It's really easy to coordinate yourself off two limbs, just jumping and landing continuously. As soon as you constrain to a single base of support, obviously you have to be much more coordinated, but then also you have to be a lot stronger to not only handle the forces of that landing, but you're not going to be able to get as far off the ground. So all of a sudden, everything that you need to do in the air speeds up as well. So leaping, it's brilliant. It's nice and stable for a lot of people. They can deal with the forces. They can produce a lot of force. It buys them extra time to do things. And whether you're useless or an absolute weapon of an athlete, just being good at jumping off two legs, it's a really valuable skill. So first question out of everyone's mouth whenever I just say to get into some light leaping, they always want to know the sets and the reps. And how I want you to think about this is from a quality perspective. So quality is always going to guide us with our dosing. And I know what you're thinking, you're like, wait, but if I'm not there in person, how do I know if my client is getting a quality dose, or if they're exceeding that, or if they're undershooting that? Just be a little bit conservative with your first couple of weeks of prescription. And that way you don't have to worry about giving someone too much plyometric volume when they have a quality issue. And then we should also cover what quality actually looks like. And don't get me wrong, this is definitely something where you have to sort of develop your coach's eye, but what you're going to experience when you start giving people plyometric workouts is you will notice, their first couple of reps are a little bit crap because they're just starting to warm up. Once they're warmed up, you start getting some nice quality repetitions. Again, what does quality repetitions look like? It sounds kind of weird, but the way they're interacting with the ground will just look a little bit sexier. They're probably spending less time on the ground, and especially relative to how much time they're then getting in the air. But then all of a sudden, at a certain point of repetition, whether it's within the set or after doing a whole bunch of sets, you just start to notice this deterioration in quality, spending much more time on the ground relative to how long they're getting in the air. You'll notice it starts to look a little bit less sexy, and you'll notice that you get all this extra flailing and all this extra effort, but they're not getting off the ground any quicker and they're not getting off the ground any higher. So that's a sign to me that we're starting to lose the quality of the reps. So we're going to start wrapping up that plyometric session pretty quick from that point. What you'll notice as well is when you really constrain yourself to just getting in as much quality work as possible, you're less likely to run into issues like shin splints and things like that are often signs that you're overdoing it, especially early in your plyometric journeys. And then even more so, once you move on from leaping into a lot of your single leg variations like bounding, or even just continuous jumping on the same leg like hopping, it gets really hard for a lot of athletes to maintain this quality of repetition, and it gets to the point where they're kind of just thrashing their body into the ground and then not getting much benefit from it. So we'll cover what that looks like after we've gone over the leaping. And when I think of an introductory intensity for leaping, it literally just start getting off the ground. And a lot of people will talk about, should you be using your arms from the get-go, or should you be constraining the arms? I mean, I'll probably expose them to both of those variations within that first session, because one of the greatest lessons you learn from that, just doing some light leaping with hands on the hips and then hands trying to complement the movement, is you realize how much a good arm swing can contribute to your leaping, bounding, or your hopping. So it just, you can say it to your athlete, but as soon as they've felt that contribution, get them to just start leaping up and down, hands on the hips, and then all of a sudden just bringing in that arm swing. Noticing if you're a little bit lazy with the arms versus being very intentful with the arms, just how much that can contribute to not only your ability to get air time, but your ability to get off the ground quickly. If you're coming down and the arms are all back here, as you're putting most of your force into the ground, there's going to be this delay. Whereas if you sync them up together, then you absolutely cook up. My second least favorite question that I get whenever I talk about light leaping is people always ask me if they just sort of do skipping instead. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that I feel like you're coming at plyometric training with the wrong mentality when you ask that question. There's so many foundational qualities that we're trying to build in that light leaping that trying to swing a rope around us is really just distracting us from. So a lot of those things, I want people to be paying attention to what they're doing, especially with their ankles when they're in the air. Can they pull the ball of their foot up so they can strike at the ground like a snare drum? And again, that's probably the one thing that we're still getting with our skipping, but every time you don't sync it up, the rope's just gonna punish you. And in my opinion, it's gonna make it an unnecessarily frustrating experience. If you just love skipping, I mean, you can do it anytime. Like, you don't need permission to put skipping into your programming, but I would do it separately from leaping. Like, I would do skipping for, I don't know, if my client's just their favorite form of conditioning or whatever, but it's definitely not gonna enhance your leaping, and it's probably just a bit of a distraction and gonna make it unnecessarily frustrating for a lot of people. And it also robs us of the opportunity to learn to sync those arms up and start to build an understanding of how the upper and lower limb work together for the ultimate jumping or plyometric experience. One of the main reasons why leaping is just such a great intro to plyometrics, not only is it super scalable just with the regular leaping, but there's so much variation that you can explore. So even just going through your light, medium, and then hard leaping intensity, also within that, you've got so many variations of using your arms, hands on the hips, or we can just do variations in stance. So we've got regular leaping, split stance leaping, and you can keep opening that up. And then you've also got wide to narrow, you've got deep leaping, and again, hands on hips and easy, medium, and hard for every single one of those variations, side to side, front to back. We can have horizontal into vertical. You can have backwards leaping. So it really is such a deep bag of different plyometric exercises, and it's a repertoire that you can explore from the outset. Whereas you'll notice that, God, even just getting your clients to the point where they can continuously bound or where they can continuously hop on that one leg, even when you get them to the point where they can do that, you're not gonna have very much of a deep bag to explore in terms of variation. One of the biggest things that you need to wrap your head around, especially if you are quite experienced in the weight room and then you're getting into plyometric training, is you are gonna be so much better on the ground than in the air. I think to most people that's obvious, but then it's also about understanding how much you can do in the air and then how much that contributes to the experience on the ground. So as much as there's totally this component of, when we're leaping, again, pushing into the ground so that we can get off, there's also this whole other component of what we are able to do in the air in terms of pulling the ball of our feet up almost like a coiled snake, and then again, preemptively striking at the ground. So rather than waiting until I'm actually on the ground and then starting to produce all that force, just as I am coming down to the ground, I'll start to strike, and I haven't hit the ground yet, but I'm starting all these muscular contractions, and this has given the system a lot of stiffness. So rather than deforming or having any sort of delay before I'm applying force into the ground, again, minimizing that deformation, hitting the ground hard, but then all the tissues will be stiff by the time they're hitting the ground as well, and then that's how you get the best pop off the ground. Again, this is something that's really, really easy to think about when we're leaping. As soon as you go into your bounding and your hopping, it's just you have fuck all time to do it really, so you've just got to be a weapon at that point. Well, we build you into it, but yeah, it's tough. Obviously all that leaping was stationary, so I'm just gonna go through a couple of sets of how I'd normally do my leaps and then transition into my bounding and then my hopping. I'll sort of talk you through again what you're looking for in terms of quality so that then you can manage your dose and your progression with your athletes, or maybe even it's just for yourself. We'll talk about it in leaping. I'll try to give you an example of leaping when you go too hard, how it starts to look like shit and you don't really get any more out of it in terms of developing athletic qualities. You're kind of just thrashing your joints and your connective tissue. All right, anyway, so I start out, all right, typically hands on the hips to get the lower shank going. Fuck it, I'll just go backwards as well, get a bit of diversity and variation in there. And then boom, straight into it, just trying to get the arms to complement that. Boom, 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 boom. So again, not just trying to think about when I'm swinging my arms through to help contribute to all that momentum, but trying to hit the ground with momentum as well. A lot of people, when you first get them into plyometrics, you'll notice that they wait till they're on the ground. They're not preemptively striking at the ground. Something else I love doing, even if it's just for 1 or 2 sets, before I transition from like leaping into either bounding or hopping or one of my single leg variations, is I'll start to open it up. We'll go for like an alternate split stance or staggered stance leap. Even just the difference between like a genuine, true bilateral base support and then just opening it up a little bit so I can emphasize that front leg, it increases the forces quite dramatically in my opinion. All right, so the next variation that we want to explore is bounding. So this is our first variation of single leg continuous jumping, but we're alternating between our bases of support. So the really good thing about this is, yeah, we're starting to explore continuous jumping and landing off of one leg or a single base of support, but I've got a little bit of extra time because as this side is doing its job on the ground, I can be setting this side up really preemptively so that it's ready far in advance before it has to do its thing. Because then when we go to hopping, I can't relieve myself by using the other leg. I've just got one leg that has to do all the force production, but then I've also got to find the time in the air to then whip the leg around so that I can hit the ground with momentum. Again, rather than what we sort of talked about at the start with a lot of people who aren't good at plyometrics, who aren't efficient, they would just run into the ground and then react to it. We want to be preemptive, hit the ground with momentum, create all that stiffness in our tissues before we're interacting with the ground so we do it well. The biggest technical cue as soon as you're transitioning into your single leg variations of plyometrics is just keep your dick in your pants. Like, the more chilled you can be with your intensity, the better a job you're going to do at this. It is, unless you are just an athletic specimen, it's highly unlikely that you're going to be able to jump off of one leg continuously on day one and you have a high intensity and have a high quality. For a lot of us, it's just trying to maximize quality and then bringing up intensity secondarily to that. If you go really hard at the start, you kind of just end up thrashing the shit out of your connective tissue and not even learning how to do things properly because you can't get enough practice in before you're giving yourself shin splints. All right, so boom, 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 boom. And so this is our second major point when it comes to quality and making the most of the momentum that you're creating on each rep and harnessing it versus just thrashing yourself into the ground for almost no benefit. So there was a fair bit of debate over this sort of between a bunch of different experts on plyometric training, had different opinions on whether or not you should be opting for a full foot landing. And I don't think you have to necessarily opt for a full foot landing, but I know what people are liking when they see this full foot landing, and I understand what they're worried about when they see these really, really toey landings, especially with your locomotive plyometrics. So we've already sort of discussed how there's things we can do in the air so that when we begin our interaction with the ground, we are already harnessing and maintaining a lot of that momentum that we've created on the previous rep. But then what you'll notice is when beginners go way too hard with their single leg variations is they'll start to apply heaps of braking force. So rather than cycling the leg through like this, you might notice that they get this really stabby out in front action. And that is, again, it's like, you're flying through the air. You've done so much work to create that momentum. And then rather than building on that each rep like we want to see, and again, you can do that toey, see? You can do it toey, you can do that with a flat foot, but the bad toey landings are these stabby, see, I'm hurtling through the air, and my body's like, please slow down, stop doing. So I have to put so much effort into braking force. Again, there's nothing wrong with braking forces. Even when we do it well, we're still getting braking forces, but just trying to not even minimize them, but just trying to keep it in that sweet spot where we can just tell that the body is saying yes to all that momentum, not, no, please fucking slow down, because I hurtle through the air, my body comes to a screeching fucking halt, and then it's got to do all the work again to get off the ground. So that is a lot of forces going through all your joints, not really getting that much better at jumping. Whereas again, when you dial back that intensity, what you'll notice is the body starts saying yes to all that momentum. We were sort of discussing how even just on that transition from leaping to then bounding, it's quite a jump, literally halving your base of support. what makes the transition from bounding to hopping quite hectic as well is, like, even though bounding's still continuous jumping off of one leg, just by the fact that we're alternating our base of support, it means that one leg can focus on doing its thing on the ground while the other leg is setting up that ground contact. All of a sudden we lose that privilege when we're doing continuous jumping off of one leg. So not only am I probably not putting as much force into the ground, then I'm not getting as much time in the air, and then I've got to whip that leg through even quicker because I can't rely on my other one. It's just, and this is why people are so obsessed with hopping. It's hectic. There's so much going on in terms of force production, stiffness, coordination, limb velocity. There's really nothing else that comes close to it. Even sprinting, like hopping at the end of the day is basically just sprinting on one leg. So with that being said, my absolute favorite drill for building people into continuous hopping is hop bound. So I'm still forced to develop that limb velocity and that coordination, but I'm just relieving myself every second rep because I've got to whip the leg through. Again, a lot of inexperienced people, they won't be fast enough and they'll start to have a shittier interaction with the ground every successive rep. But then I'm just doing 2 of them and then I swap to my other leg, which is prepped and ready to go, because then we've got our bound rep. And then again, got to whip that leg through nice and quick. Maybe I don't do so much of a good job of it, but then again, I am back to that other leg. So really good way to bleed into continuous single leg jumping, just that hop, bound, hop, bound, hop, bound, hop, bound, hop, hop, bound, hop, bound. As well, you should be listening for the noises as well. You want to hear that nice slap on the ground. Shows you're not scared and you're giving it to the ground. As soon as you start to become hesitant about that, or if it starts to hurt your shins, you need to think about the dose or the way that you're interacting with the ground. Even for myself, if I just hop legitimately as hard as possible, what you'll start to notice in your athletes is you notice a lot of extra body English, but it doesn't improve the quality of the movement in terms of getting off the ground quicker or moving through the air further or for longer. It's just, you end up just flailing around a lot. You might even spend more time on the ground. You might even get less time in the air. So again, when we talk about letting quality leading your dosage and your prescription and your exercise selection, these are all the things that we're looking for. Someone who is moving well in the air, who's economical, not just flailing around for the fuck of it. Someone whose body is saying yes to the momentum. Someone who is doing things in the air that tell you that they're keen to attack the ground. As soon as you start to seem lazy in the air, like, and then waiting to be on the ground before you apply that force. And when you start seeing the body say no to the momentum, this is when you dial back the intensity. And it is one of those things where we are playing the long game here. I think people can make noticeable strength gains in like a couple of weeks of good consistent strength training. We are playing a little bit of a longer game here because again, tendons take a lot longer to remodel than your muscles do. Plus there's so much more coordination built into what we're trying to do here. Maybe as well just some general hesitancy or fear around flying through the air and interacting with the ground so aggressively. So it's important that you be patient with it. And this is why I'm like, don't go all in on plyometric for a phase. Just salt bay it into your programming, start with a really conservative dose, and then just build it up over time. Play the long game, and it will turn you into an absolute weapon. If you need help integrating plyometrics into a holistic S&C program, got our GPP Level 1 course and community. Highly recommend checking that out. As well, you can get a free introductory program to your first month of plyometric training. That's down under the free programming link, and I'll see you all in a couple of days with a new video.